Welcome to Future Proof. I'm Adam Kranitz, Chief Marketing Officer at Resilio. Today I'm with Brice Budke, the partner and president at Shep Films. So tell me, Brice, tell me a little bit about your role at Shep Films, what you do, and what the company does.
Yeah, I'm the president at Shep Films, and we are a video and film studio out of Seattle, Washington. We, on the commercial side, we primarily work with customer stories and some product marketing content. Our clients tend to be big tech, Microsoft, Amazon, those likes of the world. And then on the narrative side, our biggest project out in the world is a film called Prospect. It's a sci-fi western starring Pedro Pascal. Premiered at South by Southwest, won our category back in 2018. And it's had a lot of long legs, that one. Still a pretty decent fan base and been popping around the streamers. I think we're on Peacock now. I think we've almost hit everyone at this point. And then we've had quite a few projects that have gone through development.
That's amazing. How are you building your IT systems to support the creative process, but also keeping them resilient to change and future-proofed?
Yeah, I mean, it's the IT systems may be the unsexy part of the job, but they're definitely the backbone of everything we do. We have a couple of projects going right now, and we're up to like 4 terabytes a project, and we're running 20, 30, 40 projects a year. So we are creating immense amounts of data. And that data is ultimately the lifeblood of our company, right? Like that's what we're capturing on set. It's what we're putting all the way through to post, and it's what we're delivering to the client. So it's, we lose that data. We at minimum lose a project, probably lose a client. We had a big focus on making sure that our data management matched the style of production we've done and, the type of workers that we are, using. We don't have a traditional office, which really changed what we needed out of a data system.
What were your editors doing before you arrived at kind of your current implementation, your current setup? How were you managing the volume of data, the quantity of data, the size of the files, the getting them from point A to point B?
I mean, I probably shouldn't admit this, but poorly is how we were managing. No, we weren't that bad. But mostly it was a really manual process. So there's kind of 2 steps in the video production world. And one of them is when you're dealing with a specific project. And so that's, we're shooting on set. On set, you're capturing the one card in the camera, and then that is gold. And at the end of the day, you're copying that out to 2 hard drives. And really the base level data management is data is always in 2 places, both like 2 hard drives and 2 physical locations as quickly as possible. So, we do a bunch of travel work for doing customer stories. And so even when we're doing that, we're putting it on 2 hard drives at the end of the day, and then 1 hard drive with us on set, 1 back in, the hotel Airbnb, traveling back with 2 different people. And then once we got back to edit, we made sure that we asked our editors to make sure that they were always keeping the project in redundant locations. Usually what that meant though is just 2 hard drives on their desk, right? Which is better than 1 hard drive on their desk, but not as good as, 2 hard drives in 2 locations. And part of this is that we use a distributed workforce for editors. It's a bit of just the reality of, the world we live in. But even this was back in like 2000, well before 2020. We were just asking them to, keep it redundant on their end. And then when a project is done, we'd have to store all the files. So then we would have an editor come into our office, get them into our systems, and just make sure that we were putting it in 2 spots. Sometimes that would be a RAID and LTO, sometimes 2 RAIDs. But again, it was pretty hard to get that in 2 physical locations. We'd have to drive one of those off to like someone else's house, who wasn't in the office. So what happened is the process was fine. There was like steps to everything. It just, the amount of times that we were actually in line with the process was probably never, right? We had a backlog of 5 projects at a time that weren't getting like duplicate backed up. So we were making sure the editors held them. That was putting extra work on them. I don't know how many times the editors were actually, having duplicate backups. It's industry standard, but there's no way I can enforce that without going over there. So basically it was just a manual process on our editors and then on an in-house editor. And we were usually always a couple projects behind.
Was there any like kind of clarifying event or incident that made you say, hey, we got to take a step back here and rethink this, the way we're doing this?
Part of it was just fear that something really bad would happen. And
Fear's a good motivator.
Yeah, it is. probably the two things that stick out in our mind is we had one project accidentally get deleted when we were just doing a backup because our process wasn't quite as bulletproof as I thought it was, right? We did double checks, thought it was somewhere. It didn't actually end up being somewhere. Or I think in that case, maybe the hard drive got corrupted. Is quite a few years ago. And it was when I was like, oh, the project was old, doesn't really matter. But the client came back asking for it. And while it was outside of standard data, it was, year and a half, 2 years old, it still left not a great taste in the client's mouth that we didn't have that footage just because we had an error internally. So it's like, is it kind of our bad? But I just never wanted that to happen again. And the other one, going through Prospect, one of the things that's nice about having our house split commercial narrative is we get exposed to what happens when you're dealing with a project that is $4 million, 40 shoot days, crews of 80 people, and like really studio level standards. And it was like, oh, this is how a project of that scale is managed in order to reduce risk. And so it was like, oh, seeing how there was, they were really intense on how we had LTO tapes in 2 physical locations and how we were constantly had the project in duplicate, triplicate in different locations. We were moving data around, like physically moving data around with hard drives. It was like, oh, we could implement some of this on the commercial side and reduce our risk. What we ran into a problem though is we don't have and we don't really want a full central office, and that's functionally how you do that most of the time.
Yeah, isn't it a balance between centralized IT and distributed workforce? So you've got people, systems, and technology and data all in different locations and storage, but you still need that centralized kind of unification to it, so that you're not dealing with SAN storage over here and cloud storage over here. How did you find a way to balance that centralized IT versus the distributed workforce?
Yeah. I mean, I think the big one for me, part of this is I've educated myself a lot on data systems and IT, but like ultimately, like I'm a producer. Before I was a producer, I was a consultant for large tech companies, and I was really working on like marketing and like finance systems. So I had a bit of background there, but it's like I'm not a IT person. Like I've taught myself along the way. There's a bit of along the way learning all the different ways you can store data, but the big one, kind of going back to the clarifying event and even just what we're doing before, is the big difference between the centralized and distributed is where it put the onus of responsibility for risk, right? So it's like when we were full distributed, we were really counting on our editors in order to make sure we were safeguarded from a data and risk perspective. Because our editors, I should say, are often freelance. And even if they're in-house, they're often working from home. But usually we're working with freelance editors. We'll work with a couple projects a year. So trying to push a lot of processes on them was, it's touchy. You push too hard and they'll just work for someone else who pushes less hard. A lot of our risk was being managed by a distributed end, where on the central side, it's really nice where you're like, oh, I have one person in-house and their job is to ensure, part of their job is to ensure that our data is secure and it becomes a core part of their job. When I'm asking an editor to do it, it's this extra task that they're doing, right? So it was like really trying to find that line with how do I make this data security someone's core responsibility, even if one of 5, versus just this tack-on thing they're doing as part of their core job, which is edit our projects. And it's like, it also is one where, they can say that they've, duplicated it on 2 drives, but how out of date is it? Are they doing it every day? So you're really like leaning on this person to understand data management, which is not their core job or skill set.
So Brice, is data management needs, enforcing policy, getting editors and producers and production staff all on board with data management, a little bit like herding cats, if you will. How have you implemented systems since then in the last couple of years to really ensure that, 1, we never have a loss in data, 2, we've got backup policies, and 3, everybody has kind of a fast and easy way to implement it, because of course the last thing you want to do is give people more work to do on top of what they're already doing. So how did you change your systems?
Yeah, we were looking for something that would automatically back up projects in a more central location that we can monitor those backups. We went down a lot of paths to see what that could be. At this point, I'd have to go check my notes to see all of them. But the one that really stood out to us was Resilio. So we're here today. And really what it means on the ground for us, though, is we have a tool that editor on our staff can manage, and it's just part of her job, right? It's not her whole job. It's maybe 15-20% of her job in order to make sure that we're fully backed up. And for our team distributed out in the world, they just have, it is a new step they have to manage, but it's a step they have to manage on the front end, and they can more or less forget about unless, the person on our team who's managing it pings them to say something's not working, there's an error from there, versus putting it on them every step of the way that they need to constantly be backing up files. And the big thing with Resilio is kind of unique to video production is we're dealing with massive files. So we can get around that by using proxies, which are just small copies of these big files. But there's a whole process workflow of dealing with proxies, and there's trade-offs to them. It's not that bad. But ultimately, you still have to back up that core media. And so you still run into a similar problem of you need that media to be somewhere and in duplicate, triplicate. And so what happens, though, is they're too big for cloud providers. Not necessarily for the cloud providers. They're too big for the bandwidth we have in just standard everyday homes in the US, right? Where you cannot be putting 2-4 terabytes up and down constantly because our pipes just aren't big enough. I have what's in Seattle Lumen now, like gigabit, where it's a proper gig up and down. It's home, so I get throttled with in the neighborhood's busy. But even that, like I am barely able to keep up, and I have what is theoretically like the best internet on the market that's not commercial. And what we found is the way you get around is you have a server, and then you have really fast pipes between like local wires. But we don't want to do that. We didn't want to force editors to go in. And we just had editors who were moving, during the pandemic. Someone moved down to San Diego. Yeah. We have editors who just live in the south end of Seattle. And that's a long drive up to the north end of Seattle where our offices are. And so we wanted something that worked for our team, also dealt with the constraints of big files and bandwidth, and didn't force us into proxies, right? Because it's like, that's fine, but I want proxies to be a choice project by project, not a requirement, just so that we have good data backups. Like it's like cart horse. And so, so Resilio is great in like the tiniest, like most small nugget is you have a local copy of files. So it feels like how editors are normally doing projects where they just have a hard drive on their desk and they edit off the hard drive. Then in the background, it is syncing with our RAIDs back, and we just have relatively cheap RAIDs. These are not fancy servers. Like one is in my basement right now, and one's at our proper office in Ballard. And so now we have those mirrored to each other. So now the project's in triplicate at this point in time. Plus, there's a bunch of nodes, and we can talk about that later. So I think at any point in time, it's in 5 places. I would have to check our diagram. And they're all time boxed a little bit off. So it's like an hour, a day, a week. So that if we catch an error, we have some copy that we can go back to. Yeah. So it's like where we went before, it's like, oh, I don't even know if I'm in duplicate. Now I'm in like whatever 5-licate is. And also we have a time-based one, which was something we weren't even considering was a risk before, that we could have an error that like found its way through the system. So there was a way where it's like, oh, this like optimizes for video, optimizes for local files without sacrificing duplicate, triplicate backups, and without sacrificing time-based ones. And it's like, look, I would love to go to cloud because there's all the benefits for it, but it just doesn't work. Like we could back up to the cloud with Resilio. We can just flip that switch. But every time we look at it, it's like, it just takes too long and is too expensive. But at some point it'd be like, hey, we can throw up there. We can get into our big data strategy, but our cold storage is LTO tapes, which is then kind of like back to it's like the least technical one, but it like syncs in with our system nicely and is honestly cheaper.
So the reality is really kind of, I hate to use this term, but it's the flexibility, right? So it's nice to add cloud when you need it. There's going to be projects that maybe require that for whatever reason. And there's going to be projects where you want to, you're going to have massive amounts of data that you're going to want to put onto nearline or long-term storage. So you now have the ability to kind of pick and choose the parts of a storage infrastructure that you need for a project.
Totally. It gives us the flexibility to use the hard drives that work best for the project, not just drop a server in our basement, right? Like we're running RAIDs, and we can run those RAIDs in whatever amount of duplication we want. based on our needs. And sometimes they're just like a standard hard drive. And sometimes they're whatever mirroring. I think we're in like RAID 0 or RAID 1 or 2. Again, this is not my world. But then, for our edit drives, we're on, like, we switched to SSDs because we need them to travel, and we can't be traveling with like a brick out in the world. And it's like, oh, that's fine. They all sync to the system. And then, when we have a project that bumps above, 4 terabytes, we can just drop to a standard edit drive, and it doesn't break the system at all. Yeah. Where if you're really locked into even like cloud or anything else, that flexibility is really nice. Or even just like I had a editor over this morning, and we're just trying to talk through. It's like, okay, well, we're doing a big AI travel project for AWS, and we're shooting on a bunch of cell phones and DSLRs, and it's complicated. It'll be a really fun project, but we're like pushing above our normal limit. It's like, oh, we just buy a bigger hard drive versus like having to re-engineer some system because we're boxed into what we can put into our overall process.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to ask next, which is, buy extra hard drives, that's fine. But has there been anything that you've eliminated from your stack as a result of kind of moving to this workflow?
So, to talk plainly on this one, Resilio does cost money, right? When we were first doing our analysis, it was a non-trivial amount of money for us given the size of our operations. I was like, oh, this really has to be worth it to pull this off. And when I was doing the cost benefit, it was like, it maybe we're netting out at zero if things plan exactly how I want. Maybe we're saving a little bit of money. And now, however many years in we are, what we've seen that Resilio has replaced is, one, I didn't really have to upgrade our data storage hardware above just industry standard, but industry standard at honestly like the bottom end. I mean, we're dealing with like SSDs, which are kind of fancy, but like not real. I mean, we buy them at Best Buy. These are like not fancy, right? And RAIDs, these are like sub $10,000 RAIDs that are way cheaper than running like a server and all that goes with that. So we were able to keep our actual hardware pretty like prosumer, bottom end professional. So it allowed us to not dip a whole bunch more money into equipment. The other thing it did is, I think at this point, now that we're it's taken us quite a bit of time to go through all of our archived drives and RAIDs, and we've just been chipping at it. I think we're now fully caught up. This is 10 years of projects that we've now all got into a like centralized storage system. And what we've done is now that that's up to date, I don't need to hire a full-time assistant editor to keep up with our project load to get all the backups together. Like those are essentially like we were doing 10 projects a year. Now we're doing 20 plus projects a year. And we haven't increased any of the hours for data backups, even though we're running so much more data than we were before, and just discrete projects. Where before it's like at some point, if, twice a month we're having to both backup projects on the front end when we get footage, then on the back end once the edit's done, that's just someone's like part-time job, like 20, 40 hours a week. And now this is someone's job that's like 5 hours a week, 10 to 15 if we're trying to go back to our archive. But as far as like discrete work going forward, it's just a minor part of someone's job as opposed to their whole job. And that is paying for Resilio at this point. Easy.
You made me think, talking about full-time versus part-time editor, going back to that notion of access to global talent.
Yeah.
How has your IT system today, as it stands with Resilio, how has that changed your ability to execute on projects? We're in a project-based business, right? Projects and deadlines, right? And budget. Getting access to that global talent, how important is that for Shep Films?
It's important. I mean, part of it's global. Part of it is just regional, right? Like I don't know how familiar you are with Seattle, but the traffic's gnarly. It's like really crossing town. You don't want to cross north, south, and east, west in the same trip. And our offices are located up in Ballard, which is kind of tucked in the northwest corner. And even having an editor who is down in like the central district, that's like a 45-minute commute just to get to the office to edit, right? So this is just in Seattle, and that's like a relatively short distance. And they like don't have to come into the office, which just saves them, hour to hour and a half a day. And again, allows them to have a much more flexible work schedule where it's like, okay, today, I need you to work a little bit later, and it's not like they have to be out of their house. They can just, log in a little bit later. Obviously, no one likes work in the evenings, but it's much nicer in your house than it is at the office. And then the other one is we've had people we really like to work with who moved, right? And, in a traditional one, it'd be like, all right, well, go find another editor. It's like, whatever, I really don't care where you are, right? Like whether you're 5 minutes from the office or 5 hours from the office, it has no difference other than sometimes it is nice to physically transfer a drive just because of upload download speeds, but like minor, right? And it's just really, do I want to be patient and let the internet take 48 hours versus, driving 10 minutes? So that one is like really helpful, right? As far as just like we can keep consistency of staff. And then also when we're hunting for editors, like we do a lot of customer story work, and there's like a certain skill set around that. And instead of just finding someone who's close to the office, I can just find someone who's good at it no matter where they are in the world. And the big one on the global front, we don't tend to work at this point with a lot of people on the commercial side from a global front that tap into Resilio. We have a lot of people we work with, but they're just not necessarily in our core edit pool. We travel internationally. Every once in a while, we'll use Resilio to get like an in-project backup. But it's, again, if bandwidth was better across the world, I would make everyone go into Resilio the evening after a project so we were instantly backed up. But we're not there yet. So it's really not a Resilio complaint. It's just like a bandwidth complaint in the world. But the big one for us, I talked about how we develop narrative projects. We've been developing this one for a few years called The Fringe. The idea here, in short, is with Prospect, we developed it in secret for a long time. And then in standard Hollywood playbook, we announced it to the world after it was done, and, once we got accepted South by Southwest, and the marketing really started right ahead of South by Southwest. And you had about 9 months until the film came out. Spoiler alert, we did not do amazing at the box office. So it is. We're an indie film up against, big juggernauts. We don't really have a marketing budget. But however many years later, 6 years later now, it still has a fan base because it just like took a while to gain that traction. It ultimately, I love that we have a fan base, and I love that people love this film. It hasn't made us any money, right? Like because the film there's a whole side thing on how the film business works, right? But if you don't make the money fast, you don't make your money, right? So with The Fringe, the idea here is like, okay, we're going to build a universe, and we're going to build it more out in the open, and we're going to just, we're going to bring a lot of fans along with the process. There's been a whole bunch of experimentation there. And then we're setting stories within that world. So we have a script that is secret, because that's the fun part about films, right? Is like watching them. And that's like going out, and it's out in the world now for actor reads and talking to financiers. But what we've done is we've built this world out with a lot of our collaborators and fans. These fans tend to be worldwide. And a lot of those fans have become collaborators as part of this process. And so a big thing there is we have some VFX artists in London and a modeler in the Netherlands, and then a whole host of people across the U.S., Ohio, Idaho, San Francisco. I honestly don't know if there's anyone in Seattle other than our core Prospect team. And we've been, in certain moments, been bringing them into Resilio in order to have, like when we're working, we did some like more Unreal Engine style animations. And so we brought them in order to have that redundant file process. Part of it, honestly, was a test ahead of, doing a feature film, because I will likely want to work with these people again in a feature film capacity. And the idea there is like, yeah, I can have a VFX team in London and a modeler in the Netherlands and pick any other geography in any other position. But the idea is, from a data perspective, that'd be horrendous, right? Like one Prospect, we were literally had an assistant editor carry hard drives from our VFX artists on that team down in the peninsula, driving it up to hand over to someone they met at the border in Vancouver, in order for them to drive up to Burnaby to drop it in there, because it was safer than mailing it and faster than like upload download speeds on the internet, right? And there's also just the world of like, you were just uploading, downloading in like Aspera or something in the back end, which was like a true like point to point system versus something that could drip upload in the background. So it's like, oh, with Resilio, this is all theoretically, that same process around the world, I can just be drip uploading in the background, and it's as though they were working in our studio in Seattle. And that's like, oh, I don't need to force these people to relocate from London to Seattle. I don't need to be sending hard drives. I don't need to be sending these like once a week, shipments back so that we can get the data. It's like, oh, it's just constantly updated in the background. And once you break that hurdle, or once you like break that, I don't actually know where that goes, because there's a world where it's like, oh, does it just change our post pipeline all up, right? Like in the sense of if everyone has access to all the files and you're only sandboxing them based on like where you want people to go, can we start VFX really, really early in the pre-production process because all the files are there? Or as we're editing, can we drop things in? It's like, it's more now a question of process than it's a question of technology. Of like, do we want them to start that early? Is that a good use of like time and budget and headspace, more than like, I don't even know functionally how I do this? Which is just, it's great. It's a good place to be.
How do you view the rise of generative AI and its impact on media production? How is that gonna change you today and in the near future? Big topic, I know. But how are you like framing it, your thoughts around it?
I feel fortunate because a lot of our clients, their big bets are AI. So I am just living and breathing whatever the cutting edge AI is almost every day. Like we were on set in Microsoft, and there's a whole, their big push on Copilot, but there's a really specific use case of Copilot we were covering. We're working with AWS, and there's a Gen AI accelerator, and we're boots on the ground with a bunch of startups that are in the Gen AI space. There's this like, I'm going to name drop this one, Audio Shake, who's fantastic. And they're going to revolutionize our post-production audio process once it like finds its way into Premiere. And it's like, I just am completely impressed with companies, like what they're able to do. It's like, it feels like we crossed some line, like once we just like crammed the LLMs full of so much data that they became super smart and super capable. And we're now seeing the downstream effects of all of those. And it's like, I feel fortunate that we're going to watch a lot of these happen. And I feel a little, and it's like I need to make sure that I'm on top of it because I'm talking with our clients and their customers. But where do I see it's going to hit? Like we've done a bunch of work with Midjourney in our concepting process, like in storyboarding or look dev. Like we've gotten very good at, especially as Midjourney's gotten better, at using that tool to be better, more realistic than stock footage or even storyboard artists. But we often use it in conjunction with storyboard artists. So we're not necessarily like we're using it on projects where we wouldn't be using storyboard artists because there's just not the budget or time. But now we get the benefit of having some like good look dev. And when we're with storyboard artists, it's just a companion piece to what they're doing, which has slightly more skill set around, how to communicate something really simply to a wide group of people. So there's that side on the look dev. On the research side, we do a bunch of research whenever we're doing these customer stories, right? Like we really have to know our clients' products and the customer's use case when we go on the ground, especially when we're interviewing. It's like myself or whoever the interviewers are, really have to know how to ask good questions to, crack that mold, really get them talking, in their own words and very conversational. And so on the research side, it's really great. Like what I can learn on industries and backgrounds is so much faster than before, where I was just scraping the web. It's like I can just, pull up ChatGPT or Perplexity and really like get down to like the core nuggets I need to know ahead of these interviews. And then the other one is kind of in that middle of like prep. Look dev is the actual work of things, right? That one's the most shruggy. It's like, if it gets good, it's just going to get implemented. Similar like this Audio Shake company. It's like they could put a lot of our sound mixers for these smaller commercial gigs, still high end, but smaller gigs, out of business. Where it's like, the sound mixers on like a feature film are still going to need to use those tools. But, if they get incorporated into Premiere, it's like I can click a button and get 80% as good as a mixer at a fraction of the cost. Yeah, I'm going to do that, right? Even if I feel really bad that
it's just an automation piece, right? It just makes you better at getting back to the more creative 100%. Tasks rather than the mundane tasks of fixing bad audio.
100%. And really what it is, like, yes, it's going to put some people out of work, probably. But similar to any automation that's happened before, what it's going to allow is the benefits that you would get at higher end work are going to go down to lower budget projects, elevating what those are, right? Like, it's back like DSLRs. It's like pre-DSLRs, cheap
Non-linear
cameras
video
look bad.
editing, desktop video editing.
DSLRs, they look great, right? Yeah, going from Avid to Premiere. It's the same things where, yes, a discrete job is going to go out, but there's now probably going to be more people who can do a job at a level because there's more tools for them. And it's like, oh yeah, I will just probably hire another editor instead of a mixer because now we can do more projects faster, right? Like there's a world where it's like, it's just going to offset a bit. So I'm really intrigued to see where it goes. I am careful to implement on AI just to, make sure that we're not investing in the wrong spot. But every time we find one that works and we put it into our process, it rarely goes out of the process, right? It's like, oh, this is now become a key part of what we're doing. It's like, yeah, the more we can find it, the more I can, honestly strip down the crews to very talented people who can use these tools to do better work. It's like, I think that, like, I don't know, maybe I'm kind of on my island here, but it's like, I find it empowering really talented people to do good work. And it's like, yes, I would just rather have multiple of those teams out in the world, like multiple 2-3 person teams doing more work than one 5 or 6 person team that had less tools to accommodate what this, 3 person team could do by themselves.
So one last question. We like to talk about getting active everywhere. What does that mean for you? How important is it for you at Shep Films to make sure that your people, data, storage are everywhere that work takes you?
I mean, for us, it's flexibility. And, it's in a similar spot where I was, just talking about how, there's certain people that are going to get put out of a job. It's like, I might be one of those people if we're not careful, right? Like in the world of like, yes, it is becoming easier to do parts of our job with AI. It'll catch up. It's not there yet, but it'll catch up, and we see that. Yeah. So part of being active everywhere is just the flexibility to move to where we're providing better value in the chain, right? So there's a world where it's like that might be, a spot where it's like, yeah, travel productions are much, more in that vein because it's harder to like automate that out of way, or it's like being boots on the ground, and that human element is the thing that really matters. So being able to like, active everywhere on that side is like, okay, well, we can be more on the ground out in the world. It's also just a world of, it's the everywhere of like the different like tool stacks and everything else. It's like, yeah, there is the centralization of data in like this world of like AI and everything else. Seems like there is a spot where it's like, oh yeah, if I could turn an LLM against all the data that is in our Resilio sphere, it's like, oh, that could be really helpful. It's like we often are trying to find a random shot of a screen in order to do a screen replacement. And I just have to remember all the projects where I shot plates of screens, right? There's a world where it's like, I imagine there's going to be a spot where
structured data there. There's
I'm
transcripts.
Just like,
Go
look through everything, find me a like plate of a screen, and they know what that means, and they come back and I have like 10 to choose from. Like, that's huge, right? And so it's that like, yes, there's going to be the world of like everywhere in the world, but there's also just my belief is, in the general sense, Resilio or everything else, a good system and a good organized house allows you to pounce on future opportunities and really like be nimble and flexible. Like, it's like with our travel crews, we have the minimum amount of bags possible, which does sacrifice a little bit on the cameras we can bring, but it means on boots on the ground, we can just walk across the city, albeit the bags are a little heavy, but it's like, yeah, you can run them around with 2 people. We don't have to like go get an Uber to every part of town or like have to get a cart. That same idea with everything else, like if our data is really packaged and we're not like kind of fumbling with it, it gives us a lot more flexibility of what we can do because I'm not having to worry about that, right? Like I'm like, that's fine. Now what can I do that's fine on top of it where I'm not spending headspace just making sure things are duplicate, triplicate backed up?
Well, well said. I guess I would wrap up with this, Brice. I've learned a lot. It was incredibly helpful. I appreciate you taking the time to talk about how you're building resilient systems at Shep Films. Before we leave, can you tell us a little bit more about where folks can go to learn about you and the work that Shep Films is doing?
Yeah. So, I mean, our website is Shep Films, ShepFilms.com. And yeah, if you are someone who's doing customer stories, if you're, especially kind of in the tech space, we tend to have a pretty good headspace around tech. Like, we work with Microsoft and Amazon. We're also doing like a partnership with NVIDIA, with one of those clients. We worked with Sony in the past. We tend to understand big tech pretty well, but we also worked with kind of clients across industries. The core tenets are pretty similar. So yeah, anything in the customer stories world, we're around. And then, if you're a fan of sci-fi, go check out Prospect on Peacock and let me know what you think about it.
You got it. Thank you, Brice. I appreciate your time and have an awesome afternoon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thanks.